So let's think about IEP domains. The basic configuration for a student with autism, and I'm being very ASD specific here because there are other designations and there will be differences. Autism in British Columbia is called Category G. So a Category G autism IEP needs to have at least these 4 domains. And this is the way that I've been trained and I've trained others, and I find it extremely pragmatic. Really what I look for in an IEP is a document that achieves its purpose by being lean and mean, and not a bloated, inflated document that people just want to file away and not look at. So there needs to be a social long-term goal area. And again, if you think about that wavy line that I introduced, that behavioral view of autism, and the triad of deficits at the bottom that lead to the diagnosis of autism, we know that students with autism, regardless of its autism, Asperger's, whether they're very impacted by their autism or less impacted by their autism, I'm trying to avoid high functioning, low functioning, which don't really exist, social skills will be an area of need. So you have to have a social skills domain. Next is communication skills, communication and language skills, in particular for students who do not have language and communication that tests at their chronological age level or within the normal age for their range. Third, some people call the third category the behavioral category. I prefer synonyms for independence, autonomy, or in most cases, people tend to like self-determination. Self-determination works well for me. It's about fostering independence for the individual. And then fourth and finally, and you'll notice in terms of kind of a priority, academics is at the tail end, because in the long term, if we can help students improve their social skills and communication skills and their self-determination, after they leave the school system, those things will serve them better than any academic things that really only matter in a classroom setting. But that's not to say that academics aren't important. I just put them fourth. And that, of course, will be literacy and numeracy primarily. Right? So that is the basic structure of an IEP. For most students with autism for whom I consult or schools ask me to come in and help with IEPs, these are my defaults. There should be 4. If there are 5 or 6 or 7, usually those extras are just variations of these 4, and it would be more concise and efficient to just compress categories together to have these 4. Now, if a student with autism has language skills, and usually if they have language skills, their cognitive skills will test in the normal range. So they have linguistic and cognitive sophistication. They don't actually need a communication domain because we're not teaching them language. They have good language, but they need more social language. And so categories 1 and 2 will be compressed into one category that will be social communication. And now we're down to 3 categories. I work with some other students who they're doing so well that they don't need a specific communication goal, and they're fully included in regular education and they are performing at grade level. They don't need IEP objectives academically, so we get rid of category number 4. And now we're left with 2 IEP domains, social skills and self-determination. And for a small number of kids that I've worked with who are doing particularly well and they're completely independent, we get rid of category number 3, right, the self-determination, and we might just be left with helping them with some socially nuanced goals. I've met a student or two who is doing so well and so successful socially that we actually can't come up with a meaningful social skills goal, in which case the decision in some cases has been made to no longer have an IEP. The student no longer needs an IEP. That is a possibility. But in the vast majority of cases, you're going to need these 4 long-term goal areas. And that's actually the structure we're going to go through tomorrow. Now, in addition to those 4 long-term goal areas, for each of the long-term goal areas, we need to know the student's present level, which is where are they today? Because remember, an IEP is meant to be a map. It's meant to take you from here to there. And if you have a good map, you need to know where you are before you know where to go or what's reasonable as a first objective. And tomorrow morning, we're going to start talking about how do you assess present level so that you have an informed starting place. Then you need measurable long-term goals, which are those 4 categories. And within those 4 categories, you need short-term objectives. So at least 1 short-term objective. So if you've got 4 long-term goal areas, and you've got 1 short-term objective within those, then you've got 4 targets that you're working on in the IEP. Arguably, that's a pretty lean IEP in terms of targets. If you have 28 short-term objectives, you don't have a lean or a mean IEP. You've got a document that is so big that nobody can remember what's in it. And so there has to be a sweet spot between, it's the 3 bears, not too many, not too few, an actionable number of targets that you can work on. And I'm going to come back to that probably repeatedly through the rest of our time today and tomorrow. Now that you've got that lean and mean IEP in terms of what you're working on, the next big question is, well, how are you working on it? What's special in special education? What are the research-based, individualized tactics that are being used as the instructional context for the student to achieve success and learn those skills? And then finally, this keeps coming back, where's the data? How are you measuring that this is actually happening so that you're not relying on anecdotes, which are just subjective opinions? And anyone learning about research knows that early on, an anecdote is not a reliable form of data. Right? And actually the Ministry of Education, starting to give away some of the message from tomorrow, the Ministry of Education recommends against using anecdotes because they are just subjective opinions. It's not actually a measurable type of data. More on that later. So IEP goals, and this comes from, you'll notice the abbreviation at the top, IDEA, Individual with Disabilities Education Act. This is the legislation in the United States that does make IEPs in the United States a legal document. And there's some good stuff in the IDEA legislation that I'm referencing here. So IEP goals should include a timeline for meeting objectives, right? Now that you've got these objectives, are they specific enough? And if they're specific, then you can see them happening. That makes it observable. And if it's observable, then you can measure it. And there's your accountability and data. Back to the specific for a minute. When I read a few minutes ago that quote from a special education professional who said, the goals tend to be too vague. The solution to vagueness is specificity. We want very fine specificity. The more specificity, the more likely you can achieve that objective and then move on to the next objective. So for example, if we had a student the student this year is going to learn adjectives and pronouns and prepositions and something else. That's a whole lot of things that could be broken down into more specific goals. So let's pick prepositions. Okay, well the student will learn prepositions. Some of you are going, remind me, what are prepositions? I'm forgetting that from grade 10 English. Prepositions are location words. Like I can take this water bottle and I can put it on and in and under and around and between and through. They're location words, right? Those are prepositions. So if we're going to teach prepositions, then a good IEP that's specific is going to specify which prepositions. Right? There may only be 6 prepositions that you're targeting and not more sophisticated or abstract prepositions. Or maybe those are what you're targeting. You don't know unless you can offer specificity. And then there's also questions about, well, which prepositions and how is the student demonstrating those prepositions? So for example, if this water bottle is over computer, and I have another water bottle in a static position here and another one over there, and I say, show me the water bottle that's over, or just show me over, and they point to this one, well, that's one way of demonstrating a preposition. That's a static display. But you could also have the person place things in positions, or they could place their body in space. There's many different ways to demonstrate that you understand prepositions. Just because you can point to an object over an object and know that that's over doesn't convince me that you fully understand in depth the preposition of over until you can demonstrate that in a variety of different topographies or ways of expressing the behavior. Right? So that is the level of specificity we're asking for. Being an education assistant, one of the challenges there can often be a lack of clear direction. I'm not really sure totally what I should be doing. And I've had education assistants say this to me. I've had behavior interventionists say this to me. The people who are on the front line say, my job is easier when you give me explicit instructions what I should be doing, right? And offering specific goals for students will help the teachers know specifically what they should be teaching. The final bullet there, the 4th bullet from the IDEA legislation, says easily connected to classroom activities. And this is one of those challenging ones. As I said earlier, you could take instruction out of context, you could take it out of an inclusive education setting and work on it in isolation. And if it's effective, then arguably that's a worthwhile tactic. However, if you do too much of that, then you just have segregated education. And then you're wondering, well, what about inclusive education, right? So this is always, you're trying to find the balance. And so we appreciate this, that it says your IEP objectives should be easily connected to classroom activities because that makes them more actionable in an inclusive education setting, and that is the guiding philosophy without question. And it's one of the legitimate concerns of IEPs is that the more specific you get, the harder it actually is to do in the natural environment, in inclusive education. The more you need a separate setting. And so this is a moving target, and how do you balance that? You've probably heard of SMART objectives. I'm going to talk in detail about SMART objectives tomorrow morning in our second section. A SMART objective is specific. We've established specific is good. It's measurable and observable. And it's achievable and realistic, and it can be done in a timely fashion. It won't take all year to achieve it. It can be done faster than a school year. That's a SMART objective. SMART objectives are under a bit of attack right now. They're under fire as we move into the new competency-based IEPs. However, when I talk to school districts who are fully on board with competency IEPs, all of them say to me, oh, you still need SMART objectives. And I've had a few kind of joking sidebar discussions with some teachers about, well, what do you call it if an objective isn't SMART? It kind of implies that it's a dumb objective. Dare we say stupid? We don't want stupid objectives, so let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We continue to appreciate SMART objectives. More on that later. So how are we doing with IEPs overall? Not that great, right? If that teacher's anecdote is any indication, research shows that IEPs tend to include inadequate descriptions of present level, so they're not operating very effectively as roadmaps, and goals that are not specific or measurable, which is one of the cardinal sins, because then it is too vague, and I don't know what I should be doing to achieve the outcome unless I have a specific outcome, and maybe unrealistic expectations. This was a study done in 2010. It looked at IEPs from 35 classrooms that were in both urban and rural schools across 2 US states, tried to find a representative sample. And if you look at some of the data, students' present level of performance, your starting point, was well-defined, 68%, 68.6. The goal or objective is measured in behavioral terms so that we know what we're looking at, only 41%. Conditions under which the behavior is to occur are provided, only 39%. That's the antecedent context, right? That's the instructional circumstance. The student's performance of this objective is described in a manner that links it to the general curriculum, 37%. And then we get into the real horror story. Specifically designed instruction is delivered individualized to the goal. This is the special and special education. This is the individualized evidence-based tactics, 2.9%. Of these IEPs identified those. A method of goal measurement data, 1.9%. And the criteria and timeline for goal attainment is described specifically for the objective rather than just being an annual objective, 0%. So that's pretty shocking. There were no correlations, if you're wondering, between the quality of the IEP and teacher variables or locations of the schools. So it wasn't that city schools did better than rural schools. It didn't matter. And of particular interest to me, teacher experience was actually negatively correlated with IEPs, meaning that the more experience teachers had with autism, it was correlated with actually poorer IEPs lacking these quality indicators. So it's not just a simple matter of more experience automatically translates into better IEPs.